welcome to the latest episode of Mascy and Moley. We've been away for a couple of weeks because I'm Steve Mascord, I'm Mascy, and actually it's Moley and Mascy because he's got more followers, and he's been in Hawaii. Moley, welcome, Tony Adams.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And you might ask why I was in Hawaii. People probably think I was on holiday, but I was just warming the Yanks up to Las Vegas, just getting them used to rugby league, spreading the gospel, and that's what I'll be telling the tax man anyway.
Yeah, I noticed that the Australian wheelchair team is going to be playing the US in Las Vegas in the days leading up to the NRL matches there on March 2. So there's a few things to go to there if you're heading over, not just the one day, the double header. I'm sure people will find plenty of non-rugby league related things to do in Las Vegas as well. I'm not sure if I'm going yet. So we're going to talk about the Broncos being beaten by the Storm this morning. And as we record this, the final Thursday night game in the NRL, Broncos resting players, hoping to get a result, and it perhaps costing them the minor premiership. They lost 32-22. We're also going to be talking about, since our last episode, lots of intrigue at Souths, with Rodney Churchill criticising Latrell Mitchell, and more recently at the Bulldogs, with an unnamed player walking out and not coming back after being punished for being late to training. There's plenty of drama there. And also in Super League, Marcus Griffiths, the referee, getting homophobic abuse, and whether there's a way around the scrutiny on referees. Is there a different approach? Is the media to blame? Blah, 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 blah. I want to thank a few people who have been supporting us. The people who support this show, patreon.com/WhiteLineFever, Phil Rogers, Richard York, and the great Darcy Lussick, still there, hasn't given up on us yet. And also the people who support us via Rugby League Long Reads, and I'll just pluck out 10, Ed Easter, Tristan Fillmore, John Minards, Alan Leach, Chris Irwin, Phil Ward, Jordan Horsfield, Matthew Windass, I don't know if that's his real name, Mark Rees, Lee Kalmar, and if it is your real name, I apologise, and Matt Twist. Now, Tony, let's start with the match that we've both just watched. I was surprised that the Broncos fielded a dramatically understrength team with so much at stake.
Yeah, and when you consider minor premierships are quite prestigious, you could be a bit cynical and say it's only worth $200,000 Australian. I got told by someone if it was worth $2 million, perhaps the Broncos would have played all their players. But it was kind of like a chess game between the two teams before the match, because for every player the Broncos rested, the Storm rested one as well. So it was pretty much like a pre-season trial, which is bizarre when you consider how much was on the line.
Yeah, it was a pretty entertaining game, wasn't it? It was really good to see Sua Fa'alongo score a couple of tries on his debut for Melbourne. He's a Melbourne junior, and I made the point on Twitter that there's a belief over here in England that you don't take rugby league to areas where they don't play rugby league. Melbourne are proud of the fact that he's only the fifth Victorian who's played for them. They're proud of it. They highlighted it on social media because you put rugby league clubs where there are fans, and then some of the fans take up playing. And then eventually you get guys like Sua who come through and play first grade. When I'm told by Canadian people, some of whom might be watching, because a lot of them still follow rugby league because of this. The Toronto Wolfpack, but basketball was not a big sport in Toronto until the Raptors came to town, and then suddenly the hoops started going up everywhere, and now Canadians are playing an NBA. You can do top-down development. It doesn't have to be bottom up, and Melbourne have been one of the most successful clubs in the last quarter century without having many local players. It doesn't matter, because professional sports for fans about money, sponsorship, TV.
Yeah, well said, Steve. And while we were speaking about Las Vegas a minute ago, let's not forget that Las Vegas now has an NFL team. So a city that for all its existence managed to survive without an NFL team suddenly has one, and of course interest has gone through the roof. The stadium apparently is one of the most amazing stadiums in the world, and they're selling out just about every week. And I reckon a lot of the people who go are tourists, but they'd also have a good smattering of locals there too. So yeah, you can take sport to new places, and as you say, so long as you got the money, the fan base, and the TV rights, you're laughing.
Yep. I haven't said yet. I haven't pointed to the bottom of the screen. Like and subscribe. Turn on the alerts. We're on Tony's channel this week, and the followers ticking over. I think he got his first 100 followers in the first week or something. So make sure you like and subscribe. This happened in the first week you're away. First week we didn't have a program, and that was South Sydney. And the old soap opera, Sam Burgess leaving, Latrell Mitchell, is he being treated? Is he getting favourable treatment, or is he not getting favourable treatment? And then we had Clive Churchill's son come out, and there was he'd sent a text which entered the public arena, and he didn't back down. In fact, he doubled down on it, and where Latrell Mitchell was called a cancer. So. A tough job being a CEO, Tony. If you're Blake Solly, how do you sort yourself through that mess? Or if you're Nick Pappas, how do you think they've handled it?
Yeah, well, it's been a dreadful mess, and as you say, he sent the text, then he doubled down, and then in typical rugby league fashion, when it all exploded, he apologised. So we got the obligatory apology, but the damage was done, and I think South's pretty much a club in crisis. I don't think that's too strong a word, and they've got this massive game against the Roosters tomorrow night, Sydney time. And if they lose and miss out on the finals, with the squad they've got, they should really be in the top, at least top six. So I think there are going to be some questions asked if they lose to a pretty weakened Roosters team tomorrow night. So yeah, there's a few problems at Souths. And as for Latrell, I mean, not trying to be disrespectful, but you look at his physique and he's a few kilos heavier than he should be, so maybe he is getting favourable treatment. I don't know if we're allowed to say that, but he certainly could be a few kilos lighter, and I think he'd cover a bit more territory, because there are times at fullback he just goes missing, and so, to the extent where people are saying maybe fullback's not his spot, maybe he should be in the centres where he's got less running to do. So yeah. Cody Walker also got dragged into the same conversation. He denied it emphatically, but of course that's what players are going to do. They're not going to say, yeah, we get special treatment. So yeah, there's a few problems at South, and of course you mentioned Sam leaving. Sam and Russell Crowe have been so tight over the years, and Sam's a South legend, been such a part of the club. And for him to walk out, as well as John Morris, at such a vital stage of the season, it's very messy. Let's just put it that way.
And it's interesting you talk about giving players special treatment, and then what's happening at Canterbury is maybe a suggestion that players should have got special treatment because he was mentally fragile or whatever, and that's going to be love-hate for this week. I'll wait for the sound effect. So the question is, love-hate, is that the punishment meted out by Cameron Ciraldo and his staff, allegedly, to this player, was that because he was late to training, he had to wrestle every player in the squad. That was his punishment. He had to wrestle every player in the squad. And this, allegedly, he didn't deal with this very well. So love or hate that as punishment for being late to training?
Yeah, to me, I think it's a bit heavy, and it's a strange situation in that the player stayed at the club and he hasn't been named in the media. And I think the media deserve a bit of a pat on the back for this, because the poor kid is broken. But strangely enough, he stayed at the Bulldogs for a week, and then asked for a release. So I think it sort of, went through his head. Then psychologically, he just couldn't get over it. And he walked out of a fairly lucrative contract. He's a 21-year-old kid. He hasn't played much first grade. Most people in England wouldn't know who he is. Most people in Australia wouldn't know who he is. But he's the most talked about player in the game at the moment, ironically enough, even though most people don't know his name. And, some people are saying toughen up, stop being a pretty boy, accept your punishment. I think it was a bit strong, both mentally and physically, in that to wrestle 30 straight guys, or the best part of 30 straight guys, he could have really done his body some harm on top of the psychological damage and the humiliation. And it obviously affected him to the extent where people close to him say he's now broken, and he doesn't have a contract for next season. And I think other clubs may steer clear of him because he's clearly mentally damaged, and it's a real shame for a 21-year-old kid to be in that position for being a few minutes late to training.
Yeah, I kind of hate the idea of that. But then again, I imagine it's not the only club, and he's not the only player who's had to do it. So this is the sort of issue that people like Jason Demetriou, I always want to say Andrew. Did I say Andrew before? People like Jason Demetriou and Cameron Ciraldo have to deal with, is that do we treat them as individuals, or do we have one size fits all? And I know Wayne Bennett's one of his favourite sayings is, don't have rules, have standards, because the players who break the rules will probably be your best players. So he obviously is able to walk that line because people respect him blindly almost, because he can see into their souls and remember their grandmother's names, and other coaches can't get away with that, and they struggle with finding that balance. But the best answer I've heard to this from anybody was Ben Ikin on NRL 360, where he just said, look, being a first grade footballer is not for everyone. You can't expect, and I guess this might go on to our next point as well, you can't expect everyone in a massive community, including fans and the media, referees, coaches, officials, player agents, you can't expect them all to modify their behaviour for you. So it gets to a point where you have to decide whether the job as it is now is for you. Now, unfortunately, in 5 years' time, the sport you're forced out of might have changed enough for you to actually be suited to it. But is the sport as it is now suitable for you to work in it? And in the end, it's a decision for you because, as I said, 1,000 people aren't going to modify their behaviour for you in your time frame. They might modify their behaviour eventually, but it might be too late for you. So that brings us to the next point, which is a Super League issue, which is Marcus Griffiths, the referee, who has been received homophobic abuse as a result of his of decisions made last weekend. I think it was Leeds versus Huddersfield. Correct me if I'm wrong, viewers. But and the question is, obviously this abuse is beyond the pale. It is actually illegal in this country. You can actually have the cops knock on your door if they find out who you are for hate speech on social media. But the other question is, who else is to blame? Are coaches to blame? Are players to blame for what they say? And most especially, are the media to blame? And I wrote a column about this, and I'll put a link to it in the description. It is true now that with the media that you have metrics and you can see what type of stories people like. And if people like being angry at match officials, you can write more stories about match officials stuffing up, and more people will read it, and who you or the people you work for will make more money. Okay, I disagree with that, and I not only do I disagree with it, but I would need to look at each story individually and say that's too much, that's not enough, that's over the top. So I would struggle to dismiss the media's coverage of refereeing errors out of hand as unfair or a catalyst. Because as I said, you can't expect a whole community to modify its behaviour to suit you, okay? But what I don't agree with is stories where they just quote from the comment section, or they quote someone on Twitter with an anonymous handle. They quote someone who is angry, who's a fan, who knows infinitely less than the people involved, than the coach, the players, match officials, even people who weren't at the ground, people who didn't even see the incident or only saw it this big on their screen. You've got to be responsible in who you quote in these sort of stories. And quoting a lynch mob is not responsible journalism, okay? But if you make excuses for people, these imbeciles who abuse and threaten, you give them an alibi, you give them an out. And in the end, the buck stops with the abuser. You can say that that was wrong. You can say, I think the guy's a bad referee. But if you get on social media and you threaten and abuse, you've overstepped the mark, and it's no one else's fault but yours. It's not the coach's fault. If you allowed yourself to be rolled up by a website, that's your problem. You've done the wrong thing. So I didn't intend to like talk into the camera and do a monologue for 5 minutes on this, but I did. So Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, well, as you know, Steve, Twitter is my media of choice, and it's where I get into the most banter with fans. And I have noticed that I can put up a story about a player going to visit sick kids in the hospital and put up a photo of the player, giving kids boots in the hospital, and I'll get 10 likes. I'll put up a story about a player changing clubs, I might get 100 likes. But if I put up, geez, that was a forward pass, that shouldn't have been a try, I'll get 500 comments, 250 saying, yeah, you're spot on, Moley, the referee's blind. Another 250 saying you're an idiot, there was nothing wrong with it. So there is something about criticising officials that fans love to do. But of course, I'm being a responsible journalist. I don't go on homophobic rants. I just call it as I see it. And if a pass is ridiculously forward, as often happens in the NRL, and of course we've got this bizarre ruling that the bunker can't intervene even if the pass is meters forward. The referee and touch judges should be held accountable, and I think the fans feel the same way, and they feel pretty strongly about it, just the same way they do when the bunker sees something 10 times and still manages to stuff it up. And I sympathise with the fans. I mean, this is winning and losing games, and it could win or lose a grand final. So you've got to keep them accountable, but you've got to do it in a tasteful, responsible way, and that seems beyond some of our fans, sadly.
Yeah, now, and the great thing is that Graham Annesley will come up and say, well, we got that wrong. And I had people in Australia say, well, I'm sick of it. He does it every week. And but actually what it does, it conditions people to understand that referees make mistakes. So they're no longer outraged if a referee makes a mistake one week, because the NRL admitted that that referee made a mistake the previous week. So they realise it's part of the game, okay? But the issue we've got here, and I worry culturally in England, whether the people involved in the game are ready for the increased scrutiny that having every game televised will bring, because everyone wants to be mates. They want to avoid confrontation. And I can't imagine an official here getting up weekly and going through decisions and saying whether it's right or wrong. And the deeper problem is, are there enough good officials to drop someone who stuffs up? Now, what you said, Tony, is like, it is true that if a player drops a ball, a player misses 10 tackles, he gets dropped the following week. So if a referee makes a mistake and he gets dropped, I think fans are comfortable with that they kind of know, well, you talk about accountability. That's accountability. Accountability isn't attacking someone's character. Accountability is there are consequences to actions. So the issue that they have here in the UK, perhaps, I don't know, is that they can't drop referees because there's no one underneath putting pressure on them. And then that might, next year, when every game's on TV, maybe lead to not admitting mistakes that are mistakes, because if people will expect the person to be dropped. And that's where accountability comes in. That's where public interest comes in. If there aren't enough referees to hold them accountable for their actions, then that is, if we're not writing about that and talking about that, then why are we here? So in the end, forget about goodwill, forget about the focus is on referees too much, and have rules. You can say this, but you can't say that. And if you do say that, we're going to fine you. And if you're a fan, we're going to report you to the police, because goodwill only lasts so far. And as we all know, people lose it pretty quickly when they're cheering for their team. So I just think people need to get a bit harder and get away from platitudes and get into rules and punishments to protect referees, but also to hold them accountable at the same time. Let's know exactly where the line is. Describe the line for us moving forward. Okay, that's longer than we normally talk about stuff in the news. So Tony, we're going to do tips, but before we do tips, you've got some questions from readers, viewers, tweeters, X's, whatever they're called now.
All right. I've got one here from Aussie Surfer. He said, "I'd love to be on a mole on the wall during the South Sydney season review," and that's kind of talking about what we spoke about earlier on. It'll be on in a couple of weeks. And Aussie Surfer also wants to know, are the three richest NRL clubs still as Google tells it, which are in order the Broncos, the Cowboys and the Storm? So to answer part one, yeah, well, as I said earlier, South's, there will be some questions asked. Russell Crowe and that other multi-millionaire whose name escapes me won't be happy, and they'll certainly be demanding a review if they miss the 8, which could be happening 24 hours from now. As for the three richest clubs, I think there's no doubt the Broncos are number one. I guess it's how you measure it. I mean, if you measure it in terms of owners, the Roosters would probably be in the top 3, in that Nick Politis is among the 10 richest men in Australia. But, if you just measure it on the clubs alone, Broncos, Cowboys, Storm, I think that's pretty close to the mark. A fellow called We the People wants to know, is there a dark horse for a position in the 8? He tends to think it could be South, but yeah, I don't know. I think we'll find out in the next 24 hours, 48 hours. We've still got several teams in there. If I had to pick a team who's capable of getting in there, I'd say the Cowboys. They could sneak in there if things go their way, and they could do a bit of damage in the finals. They got plenty of firepower. They got Jason Taumalolo. They got coming back Val Holmes, who they've really missed the last few weeks. Their halves are very sharp. Chad Townsend's been around for a long while. The 5'8's playing out of his skin. Who's the 5'8? Steve, I can see his face. I can't come up with Tom Dearden. He's just killing it. They're a good side, the Cowboys, and I can see them going a long way in the finals if they get there, which we'll know in the next couple of days. Yeah, a fella called James Zack suggests we have 2 divisions in the NRL, a first division and a second division, and promotion and relegation. And I think that's it's a great concept, in that I'm a big fan of the Premier League in England, and I love the way there's as much interest, sometimes more interest, in the bottom of the ladder than the top of the ladder. Like most seasons, Manchester City are that far in front, it doesn't matter. Whereas down the bottom, it's a dogfight for survival. And, if your club's in danger of being relegated, you're invested, you're right in there. And every moment, every goal counts. But I just don't know if it'll work in Australia, in that we don't have the population you guys have in England. We don't have the quality of teams in the second division. I guess it's the New South Wales Cup. We've got the old Newtowns, the North Sydneys, and the rest are basically feeder teams for NRL clubs. So it's a great idea and concept, but you'd probably have some interesting views on this, Steve, being a man of the league world.
I just don't think there's the money. I mean, who's gonna fund it? The NRL clubs are not going to give up any of their current funding from the commission, and the TV rights, I mean, are not going to be worth enough to fund it. And if the teams in the second division don't get comparable funding, then they're not going to be able to compete when they go up. So you'll just have this yo-yo that you have over here, where the team just goes up one year and goes down the next. So I just don't think the money. I don't think there's the money. There's no incentive either. There's not like an area or a population or a demographic that the game is not hitting that it should hit and would with promotion and relegation. I just don't think there's a motivation to do it, Tony. There's no reason to do it.
Yeah, and you've hit the nail on the head, Steve. It's could be a good idea, but again, it all comes back to money, and money rules our sport, as it does most sports. And so I think that's the answer to your question, James Zach. And our last question goes back to something else we mentioned before. It comes from VL4XR, who says, do you think the Bunnies would be better served with Latrell back in the centres? I don't know who would play fullback now. Now Tafe's going to the Doggies, maybe Alex Johnson. But yeah, look, there has been some criticism of Latrell, as I said earlier, in that he doesn't quite cover the ground that some of the other fullbacks in the NRL do, perhaps because he's carrying a few extra kilos. And sometimes he is caught out of position, and the smart coaches notice this, and it'd really surprise me if the Roosters, through Trent Robinson and Sam Walker's kicking game, don't try to exploit that tomorrow. But yeah, look, Latrell's a world-class centre, and for tomorrow night, or even in the finals if they get there, Blake Tafe or Alex Johnson do a fine job. So it's a good point our man brings up.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I know I saw someone, I can't remember who, say that he maybe needs to do a bit more work on his conditioning in the off season to justify his spot at fullback. So it seems a fair call to me. Okay, let's go through the matches, Tony. Tips time, starting with the NRL and the big Book of Feuds match, South Sydney and Sydney Roosters. What's your tip?
Yeah, and I see this as a really, really tough game. I mean, South, we've said, have had their problems. The Roosters have got problems of their own, very different problems, injury and suspension. They're without Jared Warrior-Hargraves and Joey Manu, who are probably their best forward and their best back. So to me, it's a toss of the coin. South's at home. Maybe all this drama will galvanise them. I'll take the Bunnies, but not confidently.
And the Saturday's first game, it's the Dolphins and the Warriors.
Yeah, and we should point out that this being the last round and some games not having a great importance on the 8 clubs arresting players, as they did tonight in the Storm Broncos game. And we've got the Warriors, who are in the midst of a great run, resting half their team, and the Dolphins, who have won 1 out of 11, are actually the bookies' favourites. I still think the Warriors might get there, but again, I'm not confident. It's a very tough round with all this ducks and drakes going on.
Next game on Saturday, second game on Saturday, Penrith and North Queensland.
Yeah, and again, Penrith will be shooting for the minor premiership. I'm not sure if they've already got it, Steve, with the Broncos losing, or if they have to win. I don't have that at hand, but I know they're resting a couple of players. The Cowboys got it all to play for, but I think the Panthers just too much class.
Final game on Saturday, the Steel City Derby between St George Illawarra and Newcastle.
Yeah, well, again, Newcastle, I think they'll rest one or two. They've got Ponga out, but I wouldn't tip the Dragons to beat anyone but the Tigers at the moment. So let's go the Knights there. They're on a fantastic roll. I think they're going for 9 in a row, and who would have thought that a couple of months ago?
As usual, 2 games on Sunday, Gold Coast and the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and this is one game that we can at least tip, knowing what's in front of us in that neither team's going to be in the finals. So they'll both be picking their best team, hoping to go out on a high. At home, I think the Titans will get the money.
Final game of the regular season for 2023. It's flown by. Cronulla and Canberra.
Yeah, and a big game more for Canberra, who is still some hope of sneaking into the 8 if things go their way. But I'm tipping Cronulla at home. I just think they've got a little bit too much class, and they've got a top 4 spot at their mercy if they win.
Okay, Super League tips, Tony.
Okay, we've got the Lee Leopards against the Huddersfield Giants.
Yeah, that's on Friday night, and Lee have hit a bit of a wall, heavily beaten last week, and after winning at Wembley, I believe they struggled to name a full squad this week. So I can kind of see a bit of a late season fade out from Lee. And Huddersfield beat Leeds last week. I think they'll continue their winning form and get another 2 points in this match.
All right, and the next game, Wigan are fairly firm favourites to beat Salford.
Yeah, it's a television game on Friday night, and Wigan super impressive. I actually dusted off the old match reporting boots last weekend, Tony, and did it in the 2023 way off the TV. But I did for the Wigan paper. Did Wigan and Catalans, and that was just a consummate performance, a scary performance by Wigan last week. I think they've got their serious faces on now, Matty Pete's side, and I think they are deserved favourites in this match. They'll win.
Okay, and then we got Hull KR against Catalan, who will no doubt be looking to bounce back.
Yeah, again, Hull KR are looking. You know, this is a match that's pretty hard to pick, actually. Catalan definitely need to bounce back. And really, if they are to be serious contenders to win at Old Trafford on the 14th of October, this is the sort of game they've really got to win. I think they will. I think it'd be really tight, though. I think maybe 2 points in it.
Okay. Next game, my team, the Warrington Wolves against Castleford.
Look, your team might as well just pack up and go home if they lose this match. They might as well not bother. They are still, because of their great start to the season, they're still well in finals reckoning, playoff reckoning, and they have to win this match. Cass have had a very poor year. I'm tipping Warrington.
Okay. And then we've got Hull FC against Leeds.
Leeds, all sorts of trouble, losing to Huddersfield last week. A lot of comments about the refereeing, as we've already canvassed, and this is an interesting match. I don't know why, but I just get a feeling that the Rhinos will bounce back and get a win this week.
All right, in the last game, Wakefield against St Helens.
Yeah, well, Wakey got themselves out of the relegation. Well, they're still in the relegation zone, but they got themselves out of the relegation position a couple of weeks back, and now they're facing the world champs who have hoisted a wet sail. So I think it'll be easy sailing for Saints in that game. St Helens in a canter.
Okay.
That's the end of our show. It's more. I think it's been longer than any we've had before. So Mascy and Moley will be back as a podcast next week, audio podcast, and then on this channel. It'll be back in 2 weeks, but now Tony's back in the Southern Hemisphere. We'll be doing some other videos on his channel between this show. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next week.
See you guys. It's been a pleasure.